There hasn't been a more unbelievable rise in modern-day football from continental Europe. At the start of the 21st century, Union Berlin were broke, they were in the 4th tier and they needed their fans to rebuild their stadium. But since, they've gone up, up and up, right to the summit of the Bundesliga and have participated in every UEFA competition. This is the story of how they did it. In its current guise, Union Berlin were formed in 1966, but had been born, had died and revived plenty of times beforehand. They've been Olympia Oberschöne Wieder and Union Oberschöne Wieder before moving to Köpenick in 1920, where they still reside. It is in these early days where something equated to their pomp happened, and that was a 1923 German Championship final defeat to HSV. But after the Second World War, the borders of Berlin ensured that Union would be slapped behind the wall and they would play in the Oberliga. Whilst the Stasi set up performance centres and focused on other areas, sprouting clubs out of nothing to represent the police, the army and other industry, Union were left as the civilians club. As such, they stood roughly zero chance of being successful. Success to them was being a yo-yo club and hanging around the top flight long enough to poke fun at the Stasi-led BFC Dynamo. 23 kilometres separates the Olympia Stadion in Charlottenburg and the Alte Forsterei in Köpenick. The harsher borders, such as famously a big wall and the borders of sporting competitions, were finally opened up in the early 90s. Not that Union benefited from it initially. They had brought together two sides of Berlin when Union met Hertha in a January 1990 friendly to celebrate the falling of the wall. It didn't take long for that friendship to be deleted. Whilst there were some East German clubs who could be construed as competitive, Hansa Rostock or Energy Cottbus for example, the majority of former DDR teams struggled to meet the demands of capitalism. Union were no different, as they spent the majority of the 90s and 2000s scratching and clawing simply to survive. The only light in this time was the ability to exact revenge time and time again against BFC Dynamo, who were now without their Stasi overlords. They met 14 times post-reunification and Union won 10, including an 8-0 thrashing in August 2005. They were always one corner away from bad news, however. When they almost filed for insolvency in 1997 after promised renovations got gobbled up by club debt, fans mobilised to save them, and Nike even stepped in with an 11th hour sponsorship deal to save them. Then they lost on penalties, barring their promotion to the Zweite Bundesliga. When cinema magnate Michael Kolmel helped them out financially, got them into the second tier and into a Pokal final in 2001, the money evaporated by 2004 as Union sank as low as the 4th tier. But finally they were saved for good when a band of supporters led by Dirk Zingler took over the club. The community thrived, the Weihnachtssingen tradition of Christmas carols in the stadium began, the supporters literally bled for the club to raise money through blood donations to cover the 3rd tier's footballing licence. The club were living constantly off handouts and were over-reliant on supporters. No more so than in 2008 when the Alte Forsterei was renovated painstakingly by the supporters. Almost 2,500 of them sunk over 140,000 hours of work to rebuild the stadium from a mess to a 22,000 capacity stadium to suit their needs. In the meantime, Union had played at BFC Dynamo's ground throughout the 2008-09 season and had gained promotion. The new Forsterei would be blessed with second-tier German football. Finally, was there now chance for some stability at Union? But before we answer that, I need to tell you about how I watch every single Premier League match completely legally, which means it's VPN time! A VPN hides your IP address, which lets you safeguard your internet connection. So, the absolute opposite of what the Manchester United defence would do. Am I right? No? Okay. And for those who haven't skipped this YouTube advert because you bloody love a bargain, here's why you should choose private internet access, today's video sponsor. 1. They're offering you an insane 83% VPN discounts and 4, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 months completely free. See it like Manchester City buying Citigroup players for a knockdown price. 2. You can protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. Chelsea's transfer strategy for 1. You want 783 devices protected? Just buy them all up and protect them. 3. You can access region-restricted content from all over the world 365 days a year. Good news for Spurs fans whose passports are usually back in that cupboard by December. That is private internet access. Links to the discount in the description. In short, yes, Union Berlin had never been more stable in their lives. Between 2009 and 2016, they finished between 12th and 6th every season and earned between 42 and 49 points in every campaign. They were the equivalent of Preston North End or Bristol City in the Championship these days. Never going to go up, never going to go down. That was about as much success as Union fans wanted after such a tumultuous time of it. But with Hertha Berlin sinking into the second tier from time to time, Union fans now had another gauge to measure their success: wins in the Berlin derby. In competitive matches between the two across 3 years, they shared a win apiece and 2 draws. The future, however, wouldn't be as kind to Hertha. Cut to March 2017, and the 10-man Union showed their Eisern spirit by scabbing a 2-0 win late on against Wolfsburg in front of their own fans. The match remains famous for the banner that read "Scheiße, wir steigen auf." Shit, we're going up. And this, unfortunately, would prove to be one of the many false dawns for Union, even if light was at the end of the tunnel somewhere close by. It wasn't like in 1993 when they had beaten Bischofswerda in a playoff to seal promotion only to be barred because their licence application was rejected, owing to a bank forgery. This time Union Berlin were actually upwardly mobile, and despite regressing to the mean of 8th in 2018, they made sure they slingshotted back into the conversation. That summer, the astute business in bringing in Urs Fischer as manager and promoting Oliver Runert from scout to sporting director can be marked as officially the start of this wonderful story. The mood in the club was optimistic. A banner that followed the team around all season in grounds up and down the country simply was initialed AJ, meaning Aufsteig jetzt, meaning promotion now. Led by Christopher Trimmel on the wing, Union were edging closer and closer. Although as soon as promotion became a reality, Union fans sought every measure to take the pressure off. Another banner, although less remembered but probably more impactful, read "Head off, heart on, everything possible, nothing expected," as the business end of the season closed in. Union missed out on the automatic promotion spots, but crucially they qualified for a playoff against Stuttgart to become a Bundesliga club, and they had gone to Stuttgart and got a 2-2 draw thanks to a Marvin Friedrich equaliser. All that was left now was to win or secure a low-scoring draw, and Union Berlin would be part of the Bundesliga. They would have to do so without their talisman Trimmel. Up stepped Rafal Gikiewicz, who produced a string of saves, particularly from Benjamin Pavard late on to confirm a 0-0 draw. Shit! Union had gone up. That 0-0 draw at the Forster encapsulated it perfectly. Union had kept 14 clean sheets in the Zweite Bundesliga. They would need that grit and determination in spades if they were going to survive in the top flight. The fixture list threw up an almighty stink when Leipzig were drawn to be the first visitors in Union's first Bundesliga game on August 18th, 2019. Union prided themselves on being on the right side of the conversation, and being drawn a team owned by an energy drink in a landscape of the 50+1 rule, the fans just couldn't sit back and accept it. So for as much as they wanted to create a magnificent atmosphere, the Union fans stood in silence for the first 15 Bundesliga minutes. Sure enough, in the 16th Bundesliga minute, Leipzig scored. They would win comfortably. They grabbed their first Bundesliga point away to Augsburg when Sebastian Andersson headed in from a set piece, before their first victory came quickly 7 days later, against Borussia Dortmund as well. And they were fully deserving of that win. Marius Bulter with 2, Andersson with the other in a damning 3-1 scoreline. Applauded off by both sets of supporters was Neven Subotic, a new Union signing. He, alongside Trimmel, Anderson and Christian Gentner and Anthony Uja, would be the cornerstones of this Bundesliga team. After 5 defeats from the next 6, the fixture that many awaited from the moment the fixtures were released finally took place. Derby Day against Hertha Berlin. A match revved up so much that the Bundesliga scheduled it as a top spiel that weekend, played on the Saturday evening. From the moment Sebastian Polter came on, the writing was on the wall. Entering the fray in the final 15 minutes, his telling contribution was the only goal of the game from the spot after a lengthy VAR stoppage. The win took Union to within a point of Hertha after 10 matches, and their third win proved the most valuable of the lot. It was clear now that Union were here to stay. It took them just 5 weeks to record a further 3 wins, taking apart the Bundesliga mainstays of Mainz, Gladbach and Köln, keeping them in a healthy position for Christmas. And whilst wobbles were always around the corner on the pitch, Union fans couldn't believe their luck. They were taking big scalps. Next were Bremen and Frankfurt, and by March 2020 they were seemingly home and hosed. Another step on their way to becoming a proper Bundesliga club. Then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and it hit Union fans more than most. No longer could they use their vocal terraces to drag the team through the mud. German football, and perhaps more than any other Western European brand of the sport, needs its supporters. In their absence, Union flopped, losing the reverse fixture of the derby 4-0 and only sealing their survival 3 matches from the end with a 1-0 triumph over Paderborn. It wasn't how Union fans imagined life in the Bundesliga being, watching it from the isolation of their television screens or having to climb a tree and watch from the outside of the ground. Fears that would continue into the 2020-21 season were realised when the sterile era of no supporters football continued. And yet Union coped much better in their second term in the division. They lost just twice before January and were looking pretty within the top half of the league, even if they did suffer a 3-1 loss at the Olympiastadion in December. Goals from Geraldo Becker and Taiwo Awoniyi even temporarily transplanted Union into the top 4 on January the 2nd. That meant Europe, it meant Champions League football. Still, Union's feet were stapled firmly to the ground. Only 6 points off the top of the league and nearly halfway through the season, midfielder Florian Andrich said, "Yes, but I'm thinking about being 14 ahead of third bottom. We know what the goal is." Max Kruse continued to draw plaudits despite the wins coming a little less freely in the second half of the campaign as injuries stifled their progress. But let's be honest and say Union Berlin had no right to qualify for the Champions League in only their second ever Bundesliga season. This was pie in the sky stuff. And yet, come the final day at home to Leipzig at the Forsterei, Union needed to match the Borussia Mönchengladbach result to qualify for Europe. Sure, it's only the Conference League, but given Union's rise, they'd have bitten your hand off for it previously. News from Bremen wasn't particularly good, since Gladbach had run in 4 goals in 67 minutes. But as that 4th goal hit the Bremen net, one went in from a red-shirted Union player, Marvin Fredrik with another one of his priceless equalisers. Another goal and Union were there, and on the basis of this season, it simply had to be Max Kruse, who headed them into a lead in the second half stoppage time. Shit, Union were going to Europe. But it wasn't their first UEFA campaign, although it might as well have been. Their times in the Intertoto Cup are about as memorable as a carpet, and their 2 UEFA Cup appearances, one was a non-starter thanks to East German boycotting, and the other ended at the second round thanks to Bulgarian team Litex Lovech in 2001. The normal etiquette for a minnow in European competition is to get distracted, see the big lights and drop like a stone in the league. Instead, Union went again, smashing through Hertha in the first derby, of course, and only losing to Bayern and Dortmund in the league before the end of November. Added to 2 triumphs over Maccabi Haifa in the Conference League groups, and Union were all set for a profitable second half of the season. Slavia Prague at home, albeit in their temporary European home of the Olympiastadion, and a win was needed to still be in Europe after Christmas. Combined with good form, healthy players and another overachievement in the league, it all meant a return to dreamland for Union. Until they crashed out of Europe thanks to Timo Baumgartel's misplaced pass and a draw against the Czechs. Then the second big blow to their season, Max Kruse was sold back to Wolfsburg in January. The void left behind by their talisman led to just one win from February and March in the Bundesliga. Union had simply slipped out of the European race and into 9th with 7 matches to play. Still, it has to be said, a wild overachievement for Urs Fischer's team. What they needed was a match against opposition they knew they could handle, and a trip to the Olympiastadion was much welcomed. 15,000 Union fans made the trip across town and saw an emphatic 4-1 triumph that spurred on the remainder of the season. Köln were beaten, Frankfurt were beaten and Leipzig were beaten, the latter sadly only in the league, as Union's Pokal dream ended at the Final Four stage to the Red Bull machine. Still ending with 4 points against Greuther Fürth and Freiburg meant Europe was confirmed once more. Just one home match was left against Bochum, and with the aim of matching Köln's result to qualify for the Europa League. 2-2 at the death, Tejwani grabbed a late winner as Union snuck into Europe in the final minute of the final match of the season again. This time, thanks to the defeat of Freiburg at Leverkusen, Union had even climbed up to 5th. The record books will state that they finished just a point and a place off Leipzig in 4th and therefore the Champions League. But that was never just going to happen, was it? I mean, Union Berlin in the Champions League was just pure pipe dream. Forget about it. Pipe dream with their full team fully fit and firing, and then Tejwani went and joined Nottingham Forest. And yet, the league form propelled Union to the top of the table as late as November in 2022. Hertha Berlin in the derby was now just another game, even playing teams like Schalke, one of the most reputable teams in all of Germany, and winning 6-1 was no big feat or shock nowadays. Maybe with an ounce of stage fright they stumbled into the Europa League with a pair of 1-0 defeats to another Union, this time to Saint-Gilloise of Belgium, as well as Braga. By the time Union welcomed Braga to Berlin, they had strung together another couple of binary wins themselves against Malmo and inched towards qualification by dispatching of the Portuguese team. Now a trip to Belgium in November would determine whether or not Union could survive in Europe before Christmas. They went into the match being dethroned at the top of the Bundesliga for the first time in 48 days thanks to Bayern's 6-2 win over Mainz and thanks to Union's win against Gladbach transpiring 24 hours later. Cheers, schedulers. Sven Mikkel got the only goal in Leuven, confirming Union's knockout spot. The Qatar World Cup was the great leveller. Would Union's form merely be temporary? They began 2023 by rattling off 5 wins, including a sweet triumph in Leipzig and an even sweeter away day against Hertha. 5 derbies in a row Union had won, 22 points sat between them after this contest, and if it wasn't abundantly fucking clear already, Union were the team in Berlin. Some were saying they could even be the team in Germany. Alright, that's maybe a bit of a stretch, but by February people were starting to take Union a bit more seriously. Then they went and beat Ajax in a European knockout tie. Try telling an Union fan that little nugget in the 1970s. As fun and as momentous as that match was at the Forsterei, Union was sweating over booking their passage to the Europa last 16, whilst Bayern had a free week to relax ahead of what people were actually calling a match between title rivals at the Allianz Arena. Ultimately, it was a step too far as Union comfortably went down by 3. With 12 games to go, Union only trailed Bayern by 3 points. By the time of yet another Union derby with Saint-Gilloise in Europe in mid-March, Union hadn't won another league game and it was clear that the season had tailed off. Another 3-goal defeat put them out of Europe, but their league form hadn't tapered off that much, and it meant just a point at home to Werder Bremen on the final day would mean Champions League football. Rani Khedira's winner confirmed the unthinkable. Shit! Union were Champions League. The difference in the club was stark. Now they were signing players like Robin Gosens, Kevin Volland and Leonardo Bonucci, like a pent-up kid applying sugar daddy on the Football Manager editor. Gosens ruined Darmstadt on his belated Bundesliga debut at the age of 29, but Bonucci flattered to deceive in what would be his only season with the club. In truth, this was finally the campaign in which European football caught Union Berlin and swept them up in a euphoria that meant their domestic form suffered as a result. For a team of their size, it was inevitable. The only shocking thing was that it took so long. Speaking of inevitable, it was a late Jude Bellingham winner that stopped Union from gaining anything from their opening Champions League game against a fitting opponent in Real Madrid. Their true rivals for qualification anyway were Napoli and Braga. Their first quote-unquote home match came against Braga, where they were undeservingly picked off 3-2. A combination of bedding in way too many signings at once and struggling with injuries meant an already difficult season was made 10 times worse. They were competitive against both Braga and Napoli, drawing twice and losing by the odd goal twice before completing a campaign of misfortune with another late Real Madrid winner in the Olympia Stadium. The record books read 2 points and bottom of Group C. The reality was probably closer to challenging Napoli for a last 16 berth. But these were just the fine margins at the highest of levels. Thankfully, it wouldn't derail Union's season too much and they would ultimately pull clear of relegation, but they would have to do so without Urs Fischer, who left in November. It turns out 12 defeats on the spin was enough for what was previously the safest dugout seat in the whole of the Bundesliga to be vacated. Fischer lasted 5.5 years. His successor wouldn't even make the end of the 23-24 campaign. It wouldn't be Union if they didn't save a last-minute goal for the final minute of the Bundesliga. This won their third in 3 seasons, arguably their most valuable. Yannick Haberer in stoppage time the difference in a 2-1 win over Freiburg as they avoided the relegation playoff on goal difference. Hertha Berlin were taken over in 2019 by Lars Windhorst and under the promise that they would be transformed into a big city club. Since then, they've rattled through 8 permanent managers, only finished above Union in the 2019-20 season, courtesy of goal difference, played in 0 European matches, finishing in 14th and 16th, before belatedly being relegated in 2023, and the only times they have gotten a result out of Union in the Bundesliga has been without fans present. Union could never claim themselves to be a big city club. They feel uneasy even speaking of themselves as representing the whole of Berlin. They're happy packed away into little old Köpenick as their membership grows along with its cult following as they traverse up the Bundesliga table. There were times when Union fans were terrified of change, of pushing too hard to chase the impossible dream. Union's owner said, "There are clubs who do that and they end up without any clear identity at all." There are plans to upgrade the Forsterei to close to 40,000 seats. The demand is certainly there, but for a naturally paranoid supporter base, they still remain wary of change. Without the weight of Europe, Union has started the 24-25 season well under new manager Bo Svensson. Svensson had previously transformed Mainz from being doomed to being perennially mid-table. Whilst Union's doom spiral last season now looks to be more of an aberration, perhaps they and their fans could do with a moment out of the spotlight. But when you've had the crumbs of European football bigger and better and sweeter with each passing year, these Hansel and Gretels will sooner or later beg for a return. New to this channel? Don't worry, we've got you covered. Here's our latest 2 issues of videos.